It was late September of 2011 when I decided to go camping alone for the weekend. I had been driving through northern Montana for a few days, just wandering aimlessly, stopping where I wanted, sleeping in my car or pitching my small green tent wherever it felt quiet enough. I found something peaceful about being alone with just the sound of wind and trees. I wasn't looking for adventure, just silence. That afternoon, I left the main road and drove down an unmarked dirt trail that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The road was rough, filled with uneven dips and patches of overgrown grass. I had to drive slow so my old Chevy wouldn't bottom out. The deeper I went, the more isolated it felt. The trees grew thick on both sides, their branches closing in overhead, blotting out most of the sun. My phone had already lost signal a while ago, and there wasn't a single sound besides the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel. After about 30 minutes, I saw a clearing ahead. When I pulled in, I realized it used to be a campground. There were 4 fire pits made from rusted metal rings, a few wooden posts that probably used to hold signs, and what was left of a collapsed picnic table. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The trees had grown around the sites, reclaiming the area. Moss covered most of the wood, and there were bits of broken glass scattered here and there. The air was heavy and still. I parked near the edge of the clearing and got out. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Old damp wood, mold, and the faint scent of smoke that lingered like something once burned here and never left. I walked around, kicking through leaves, checking for a flat enough spot to set up my tent. I picked one near an old fire ring that seemed less sunken into the ground. As I unpacked my gear, I noticed something strange. There were faint tire marks on the far side of the clearing, not too old. They curved into the trees and disappeared. They weren't mine, and they didn't look like they belonged to any large truck or SUV, more like ATV tracks. I figured maybe some hunters or locals used this place sometimes. Still, the tracks looked fresh enough that it made me feel uneasy. By the time I set up my tent and gathered wood for a small fire, the sun had started dropping behind the trees. The air cooled fast, and the sound of insects grew louder. I lit the fire, cooked a can of chili, and sat beside it as the light faded. There was something strange about the way the forest around me sounded. Like it wasn't quite right. It wasn't silent, but it was too calm, like all the normal night sounds were distant. I could hear something faint, like a low crack every now and then, not from the fire, but from deeper in the woods. It wasn't constant, just enough to make me glance toward the dark tree line. After finishing my meal, I cleaned up, put everything back into the car, and sat by the fire again. The stars were out, scattered between thin clouds. The fire popped and hissed, throwing light on the ground around me. That's when I noticed something, a shape on the far end of the clearing. At first, I thought it was just a tree stump, but when I squinted, I realized it looked like an old tent. It was barely standing, slumped over, its fabric torn and faded gray. I must have missed it when I first walked around. I decided to check it out before going to bed. The tent looked ancient. The poles had collapsed long ago, and the fabric was stuck to the ground from moisture. When I kicked some leaves away, I saw what looked like a metal cup half buried in dirt and a piece of an old sleeping bag, chewed by animals. The zipper was rusted shut. It was probably from whoever used to camp here when the site was still maintained. I brushed off the dirt, looked around a bit more, and went back to my fire. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, the fire was dying down. I zipped up the tent door, leaving a small opening for air. The night was quiet again. I lay there, staring up at the dark fabric ceiling, listening to the faint patter of wind brushing through the trees. I must have dozed off for a while because when I woke up, everything was pitch dark. My watch said 2:37 a.m. The fire was out, and the only sound I could hear was rain tapping lightly on the tent. Then I heard something else, movement. Not the soft patter of rain or the shifting of branches, but slow, deliberate crunches of footsteps on wet ground. They were faint, spaced apart, but close enough that I could tell they were in the clearing. My heart started pounding. I held my breath, listening carefully. The sound came again, one step, then another, and then a long pause. Whoever or whatever it was wasn't rushing. It sounded like they were circling the tent. I didn't move. I lay still, staring at the faint outline of the tent's wall. I could hear my pulse in my ears. The footsteps stopped near the back of the tent. I thought maybe it was an animal, but the steps were too heavy and slow for that. It sounded like boots sinking slightly in mud. After a few seconds, there was silence again, followed by the faint creak of something metallic, like a chain or tool shifting. I waited, barely breathing, for what felt like an hour. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it must have been a deer or maybe wind messing with my imagination. I stayed awake for a long time before finally drifting back into light sleep. When I woke up again, the sun was up, though the sky was still gray from clouds. Everything was damp from the night's rain. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The first thing I noticed were footprints, fresh ones, in the mud near my fire pit. They weren't mine. They circled the tent once, then led off toward the trees near the direction of the old tire tracks I'd seen earlier. I followed them for a bit, my stomach twisting tighter the farther I went. They went about 20 yards before disappearing into thick grass. I looked around and saw something half buried in mud. A torn piece of fabric, dark green like a jacket sleeve. I picked it up, and it smelled faintly of gasoline. That's when I noticed a shape farther ahead through the trees. Something large and metallic. It was an old camper van, tilted on one side, half swallowed by weeds and dirt. The windows were fogged and cracked. I walked closer, my boots sinking into the soft ground. The back door of the van was open, hanging crookedly on its hinges. Inside, everything was a mess. Rotted wood panels, scattered cans, pieces of old tools. There was a smell too, thick and sour, like wet clothes that had never dried. On the small table inside, there were faded maps, a half-empty gas can, and what looked like a moldy sleeping bag shoved into the corner. I stood there for a minute, staring at it all, and it hit me. Someone had been living here. Maybe not recently, but not too long ago either. The tracks near my camp, the footprints, the sound in the night. It made sense. I backed away slowly, heart hammering again. I went straight back to my tent, stuffed everything into my car without folding it properly, and started the engine. I didn't even look back when I drove out. The dirt road seemed longer than before, the trees closing in even tighter. Every bump in the road made my hands grip the wheel harder. It took me almost 40 minutes to get back to the highway. Once I reached the main road, I didn't stop until I saw a small diner near a gas station about an hour away. I parked and sat there in silence for a long time, trying to calm down. That night, when I checked my car later in a motel parking lot, I noticed muddy handprints on the back of the trunk. Not mine. Smudged, uneven, like someone had been leaning against it or pushing it before I left the campsite. I never went camping alone again after that. I still don't know who was out there or how long they'd been living in that abandoned place. But sometimes, when I drive through remote areas and see those old faded campsite signs by the road, I think about that clearing, the rotted tent, the van, and those slow footsteps circling me in the dark. And I still can't figure out what scared me more that night. The sound of those steps, or the fact that whoever made them never said a single word. It was late September of 2017 when I decided to go camping alone near Cedar Lake, a small, quiet place in northern Minnesota. I was 26 back then, working a desk job that made every week feel the same. I wanted a break from screens, traffic, and people. The weather that weekend was supposed to be calm, cool nights, dry air, and no storms. I packed my gear into my old Toyota Tacoma, threw in my tent, a sleeping bag, my small propane stove, some canned food, and a 6-pack of beer, then started the 3-hour drive out of town. The road to Cedar Lake wound through miles of dense forest. Tall pines leaned over the gravel path like they were trying to touch each other across the road. My GPS stopped working about halfway there, but I had printed directions just in case. I reached the small clearing by the lake around 6 p.m., right as the sun started dipping behind the trees. The lake was still, black as glass, and there wasn't a single person or boat in sight. I parked close to the water and took a slow walk around the area before setting up camp. The air had that sharp autumn chill that makes your breath visible. The smell of pine needles and wet soil hung heavy in the air. I picked a flat spot a little away from the water, cleared some sticks, and pitched my tent. The ground was uneven, but I didn't care. I set up a small fire pit using stones nearby and gathered a bit of dry wood. As the light faded, the forest grew quiet. No wind, no distant cars, nothing. Just the occasional ripple from the lake and the faint rustle of animals in the brush. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, the kind of silence that almost hums in your ears. I cooked a can of beans on my little stove, ate quickly, and sat by the fire until the last bit of orange faded from the sky. By 9 p.m., it was fully dark. I could see the faint outline of trees around me, but the rest of the forest was just a wall of black. My phone had no signal, and the only light came from the small fire. I cracked open a beer, sat back on a log, and listened. There was something calming about being that far away from everything. Then I heard it, a short, sharp snap of a branch somewhere behind me. I turned around, scanning the darkness. Could have been a deer or a raccoon, maybe even a fox. The woods were full of life. That sound alone didn't mean much. I tried to ignore it, but then another sound came. Slower, heavier, like deliberate footsteps. Leaves crunching one after another. I stood up and pointed my flashlight into the woods. The beam cut through the trees for maybe 20 feet, but I saw nothing. My heart rate picked up, and I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. Still, there was something about the rhythm of those steps that didn't sound like any animal I knew. They were spaced too evenly, too slow. I yelled out, just a short shout, hoping it would scare off whatever it was. The sound stopped instantly. Dead silence again. I waited, listening so hard it made my ears hurt. Nothing. After a minute, I sat back down, trying to relax. The fire had died down to glowing coals, so I tossed on a few small logs. The warmth helped a little, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. About an hour passed. I checked my watch, almost 10:30. I decided to call it a night. I packed my food into the truck so animals wouldn't mess with it, zipped myself into the tent, and laid back on my sleeping bag. The rainfly flapped lightly in the cold wind that had started up. I turned off my flashlight and stared into the dark fabric above me, listening. Took me a long time to fall asleep. Every tiny sound outside made me open my eyes again. Branches creaking, small things scurrying through the leaves, the wind shifting. Around midnight, I must have drifted off because I woke up later to a completely different kind of noise. It was faint but steady, the sound of wet footsteps moving on soil, coming from near the water. I froze. My tent was maybe 50 feet from the lake, so whoever or whatever was out there was close. The steps were slow, dragging slightly, and every few seconds, I could hear the squish of mud. I sat up, completely still, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Then came a soft metallic sound, like something tapping lightly against metal. I realized it was near my truck. I kept listening, and after a few seconds, I heard the truck door handle rattle. Once, then again. Someone was trying to open it. I grabbed my flashlight and my small camping knife, which wasn't much use for anything but food prep. My mouth went dry. I didn't move for a while, hoping whoever it was would just leave. The rattling stopped. For about a minute, there was only silence. Then, faintly, I heard slow footsteps again, this time coming toward my tent. The crunch of leaves grew louder. I could hear breathing now, shallow, rough breathing, just outside. The beam from my flashlight was shaking in my hand, but I didn't turn it on yet. I waited. The shadow outside my tent shifted slightly, like someone was leaning close. I finally snapped. I turned on the flashlight and unzipped the tent just an inch, shining the light through the gap. I only saw a shape for a split second. A man's leg, muddy up to the knee, wearing worn-out jeans. Then he moved fast, away from the tent and toward the woods. The sound of his feet crashing through the brush faded quickly until there was only silence again. I sat there for a long time, barely breathing. My first thought was to run to the truck, but the idea of stepping out there made my stomach twist. I stayed inside the tent until the sky started to lighten, sitting up the whole time, knife in hand, flashlight dying slowly in the corner. When morning finally came, I unzipped the tent and stepped out carefully. The air was cold and damp, and the ground was covered in dew. Everything looked normal at first until I noticed the footprints. They were everywhere, circling the tent, leading to and from the truck. Deep prints made by heavy boots, not animal tracks. I walked over to the truck and saw the driver's side door smeared with mud, and the handle scratched like someone had forced it. I opened the door. Everything inside looked fine, until I saw what was on the driver's seat. It was a small, folded piece of paper. My stomach dropped. I picked it up with shaking hands and unfolded it. There were no words, just a rough pencil drawing of a tent. My tent, and a small X marked right beside it. That was enough for me. I threw everything into the truck without packing properly, left the tent poles still in the ground, and drove out fast. I didn't even check the mirrors until I hit the main road. My hands were shaking the entire drive back. When I got home, I thought about reporting it, but what would I even say? That some stranger drew my tent and left it in my car? No proof, no description, nothing stolen. I never went back to Cedar Lake after that. A few months later, I read an article online about a missing hiker found near the same area. It said his camp had been ransacked, and they suspected he'd been attacked or followed before disappearing. No suspect was ever found. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. The sound of those slow, wet steps in the mud, the breathing right outside my tent. I don't camp alone anymore. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I picture that piece of paper, that small X beside the tent, and I wonder if that night wasn't just random, if maybe I left just in time. It was late summer of 2018 when I decided to spend a few days camping alone in southern France. I was 28 back then, tired of city noise, tired of people, and I wanted silence. I rented a small gray Peugeot, packed my tent, some food, a flashlight, and a knife just in case. I chose a quiet forest area near a small village called Saint-Montan, not far from the Rhone River. It wasn't a famous tourist spot, and that's what I liked about it. It looked peaceful, surrounded by tall trees and narrow dirt trails that went deep into the woods. The first day was calm. I reached the area around noon, parked near a gravel road, and hiked about half a mile into the woods to find a good camping spot. The air smelled like pine and dry soil. There was no sound except for crickets and distant birds. I found a flat area between two big oak trees, perfect for pitching my tent. I set everything up, laid out my sleeping bag, and cooked some instant noodles on my small gas stove. The silence felt heavy but peaceful. As evening came, the sky turned orange and then purple. I sat by a small fire I made, watching the flames dance. I remember feeling completely alone, but not in a bad way, just aware of how quiet the world was out there. By around 10 p.m., I put out the fire and crawled into my tent. I left the flap open for air, listening to insects buzzing and leaves rustling. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. It was one of those half-conscious wake-ups, where you don't know why you opened your eyes, but you just did. I lay still, staring at the faint orange glow from the embers of the fire outside. That's when I noticed something, a soft crunching sound. Footsteps, slow, uneven ones. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or wild boar, but the sound had a rhythm. One step, then another, then a pause. Human steps. My whole body froze. I held my breath, listening carefully. The steps were moving near the trees, circling. I could hear twigs snapping softly, dry leaves shifting. After about a minute, the footsteps stopped. I stared through the small opening of my tent. The forest was still dark, but my eyes were adjusting. And then I saw him, a man. He was standing about 20 meters away, near the edge of the firelight. He was tall, maybe 6 feet or more, thin, wearing dark clothes, looked like a black jacket and pants. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I noticed how still he stood, completely motionless, like he was staring straight toward my tent. I stayed frozen, not moving a single muscle. My breathing was shallow. My first thought was maybe it was a hiker or local who got lost, but no one camps that deep in the woods at night, especially not dressed like that. The way he stood there, it didn't look like someone who needed help. It looked like someone watching. I slowly reached for my flashlight beside my sleeping bag. I turned it on and pointed it toward him. The beam hit the trees, but he was gone. I scanned left and right. Nothing, just shadows and branches. The sound of insects filled the silence again, and for a second, I thought maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was a tree trunk or my half-awake mind making shapes in the dark. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. I kept the flashlight in my hand, staring at the tent flap until dawn. In the morning, the forest looked completely normal again. Bright sunlight filtered through the trees, birds chirping like nothing happened. I stepped out of my tent and walked toward the spot where I thought the man had been. The dirt was uneven, scattered with leaves, but there were footprints, fresh ones. Shoe prints, clearly human, leading from the trail toward my camp and then away into the woods. I followed them a few meters, but they disappeared near the brush. That's when a cold realization hit me. Someone really had been there. Someone walked up to my camp in the middle of the night, watched me, and then left. I should have packed up right then and left, but I didn't. I told myself it could have been some local checking on me or a traveler passing through. I didn't want to ruin my trip over something that might have been harmless. That afternoon, I went hiking further up the trail, maybe 2 kilometers. I didn't see anyone the whole time, but I did notice a faint smell, like smoke. At one point, I saw a small clearing with burnt wood and old cans. Someone had camped there not long ago. There was a torn blue tarp tied between trees, half collapsed. I didn't stay long. Something about that spot made my skin crawl. When I came back to my tent around evening, I noticed something subtle but off. My stuff had been touched. My backpack was slightly open, though I was sure I zipped it before leaving. A can of food was lying on its side. Nothing was stolen, but someone had gone through my things. That night, I didn't make a fire. I sat in my tent with the light off, just listening. Every sound felt louder than usual. Around midnight again, I heard movement, closer this time, dry leaves crunching. My heart started pounding. I grabbed the knife from beside my sleeping bag and waited. The steps came slower, like whoever it was trying not to make noise. Then I saw a silhouette outside the tent, the shape of a head and shoulders, faintly outlined against the dark. He was standing right outside. I could hear him breathing, slow, heavy breaths. I didn't move. I held my knife tightly, shaking. After maybe 10 seconds, the shape started moving again, walking around the tent. I heard him circling once, then stopping on the other side. My pulse felt like it was in my throat. Then I heard a sound that made my stomach twist. Fabric moving. He was touching my tent, running his hand across it. That was it for me. I unzipped the back of the tent quietly, slipped out, and crouched down. I kept low and started crawling toward the trees, trying not to make a sound. My car was maybe half a mile away. I didn't look back. Every small crack of a twig made me feel like he was right behind me. When I finally reached the gravel road, I sprinted. I could barely see anything, just my flashlight beam bouncing. I reached the car, threw my bag in, started the engine, and drove off so fast I nearly went off the road. I didn't stop until I was back near the village. I parked in front of a small bakery that was closed for the night and just sat there in my car, shaking, trying to breathe normally again. The next morning, I told a local man at the cafe about what happened. He said people sometimes saw a strange man living off the forest near St. Montan. No one knew who he was, just that he moved camps often and avoided everyone. Some said he used to be a local who went missing years ago after losing his family. Others said he was just a drifter who didn't want to be found. I never went back to that forest. When I think about it now, what scares me isn't just that he was there. It's that he knew exactly where I was sleeping. He could have unzipped that tent in the middle of the night if he wanted. He could have done anything. Every time I camp now, I always pick spots near people, near roads, never alone in deep woods again. I don't even light big fires anymore. I keep my light low, my car close. That trip taught me something I'll never forget. The scariest things out there aren't ghosts or monsters. It's people, the ones who watch you from the dark, the ones who don't say a word, the ones who wait until you're alone. It was in early October of 2018, somewhere deep in the forests near Mount Rainier, Washington. I had taken a week off work just to get away from everything. No phones, no emails, no people. I wanted the kind of quiet that only comes from being far away from everything familiar. I was 29 then, still thinking I was tougher than I really was, and camping alone felt like a test I needed to pass. The forecast said rain, but I didn't care. I packed my tent, sleeping bag, stove, and some dry food. I figured a little rain might even make it more peaceful. By the time I reached the trailhead that afternoon, the air already smelled wet. Pine and earth mixed with the kind of cold dampness that seeps into your jacket no matter how thick it is. I hiked for hours, following a narrow trail that wound deeper and deeper into the woods. Everything around me looked dark green and heavy, the branches bending slightly from the weight of moisture. My boots sank into the soft mud every few steps. By evening, I had found a flat clearing near a small creek. It wasn't an official campsite, but it was open enough for my tent, and the sound of the running water made it feel calm. I pitched my tent quickly, my fingers stiff from the cold. The rain had started by then, a steady drizzle that made the fabric of the tent slick and shiny under my headlamp. I made a small fire with some half-dry wood I'd gathered, enough to heat my dinner and keep me warm for a bit. The flames hissed as raindrops hit them, and a faint steam rose into the air. The smoke stuck to my clothes, and the ground around me turned darker, heavier with every passing minute. When the rain started coming down harder, I crawled into my tent and zipped myself inside. The sound of it hitting the fabric was constant, like thousands of fingers tapping all at once. I laid there listening to it, the rhythmic noise almost soothing. My sleeping bag felt warm, and for a while, I thought I'd actually sleep through the storm. But sometime after midnight, something pulled me out of sleep. I didn't know what at first. The rain was still hammering down, the creek still rushing nearby. It was one of those half-awake moments when your body feels frozen but your mind starts catching up. Then I heard it, a faint crunch. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and heavy, moving through wet soil. At first, I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, maybe even a bear. But bears didn't usually walk that quietly. The sound came again, closer this time. It wasn't steady, more like someone stepping carefully, testing the ground before each move. The pattern wasn't right for an animal. I stayed completely still, my heart thudding in my ears. I could hear the water, the rain, and under it, those faint, deliberate steps circling the tent. I turned off my headlamp. The tent was almost pitch black except for the dim gray light from the storm outside. The footsteps stopped. For maybe a full minute, there was nothing but the rain. Then I heard a wet shuffle, like something brushing against the side of my tent. I could see a faint shadow move across the thin fabric, but the rain made everything blurry and hard to make out. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Every instinct told me to stay quiet. The sound circled around again, slower now. I realized I hadn't packed anything that could really defend me, just a small knife for food prep. I reached for it silently, my hand shaking so much that the metal barely made a sound when I picked it up. I waited. The sound stopped again. For a few seconds, there was absolutely nothing but the storm. Then, as if something had changed its mind, the sound faded away. Slow, steady footsteps moving back into the woods. I listened for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe more. My body wouldn't relax. I couldn't tell if whoever it was had gone far or was still standing out there, just watching. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been an animal after all. Maybe a hiker caught in the rain, just passing through. I tried to sleep again, but every small noise made me tense up. When I woke up the next morning, the rain had slowed to a mist. The light outside was gray and flat. I unzipped the tent slowly, stepping out onto the soaked ground. The clearing looked different in daylight, quieter, emptier. Then I saw them. Footprints. Human ones. They weren't mine, I could tell by the shape and the size. Whoever had been out there last night had circled my tent twice. The prints were deep, pressed into the mud, and led back toward the trees. I followed them a few feet before stopping. The tracks disappeared into the thicker part of the woods where the ground turned to leaves and needles. There was no sign of anyone. I felt that uneasy feeling crawl up the back of my neck again. I packed everything fast, faster than I ever had before. I didn't even bother with breakfast. I stuffed the wet tent into my bag, threw everything else on top, and started back toward the trail. The forest was dead quiet except for drops of water falling from the branches. I kept looking over my shoulder every few minutes. The trail looked different now, washed out in places by the rain. My boots slipped in the mud, and my clothes were soaked through. Every sound made me jump. The cracking of a branch, the rush of the wind. I kept replaying the footsteps in my head, the way they'd moved, how slow they were. I didn't stop until I reached my car. Hours later, my lungs burning from the hike. When I finally looked back one last time before leaving, I saw nothing but the fog drifting between the trees. It was hard to tell if anything had really happened or if I just imagined it all. But when I got home that night, I took everything out of my backpack to let it dry. My tent was still damp and covered in bits of mud. As I unfolded it, I noticed something strange. A small rip near the bottom of one side. The tear wasn't from a branch or a rock. It looked like it had been cut cleanly, as if by a knife right through the fabric. I just stared at it for a long time. It wasn't big, maybe 2 inches long, but it was enough to make me realize what I'd felt that night hadn't been my imagination. Someone had been there, right next to my tent, close enough to touch it. Maybe they'd changed their mind. Maybe the rain or my movement scared them off. I'll never know. I threw the tent out the next day. I haven't camped alone since. Sometimes, late at night when it rains, I still hear that sound in my head. The slow crunch of footsteps circling in the dark. And every time it storms, I remember how close that sound really was, how thin that layer of fabric had been between me and whoever or whatever was out there watching. It was the summer of 2012, and I was 27, living alone in Denver. I had been working 6 days a week, same dull pattern every day, and one weekend I decided I needed to disappear for a bit. I packed up my old gray Ford Ranger with a tent, sleeping bag, food, and a few essentials. I didn't want to go to any popular campground filled with families or loud groups. I wanted silence, woods, and isolation. I found a small spot online, **Black Hollow Creek **, deep in western Colorado. It wasn't on most maps, just a tiny pull-off near an old service road used by hunters. The drive took almost 6 hours. I left early morning, and by the time I got to the last stretch of road, it was just gravel and dust. The place felt forgotten. The air got colder, the trees thicker. The road bent and twisted until I reached a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a thin stream running nearby. It was perfect, quiet, lonely, and completely cut off. I parked the truck, stretched my legs, and set up camp near the creek. The smell of pine needles and wet dirt hung in the air. I remember the soft sound of the water running beside me. It felt peaceful, steady, like the kind of sound that could put you to sleep. I set up the tent, built a small fire pit with rocks, and cooked some canned chili on my little stove. Everything was calm. I felt good, free even. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the woods darkened faster than I expected. The sky went from orange to deep blue, and soon it was black. I lit my lantern and sat by the fire, listening to the crackling sound of burning wood. Crickets chirped, and I could hear the soft hum of the creek. The temperature dropped sharply once night fell, and the quiet became heavier, like the air itself was pressing down. I tried to read for a while, but found myself distracted by the silence. Every now and then, I'd hear small snaps from the woods. At first, I thought it was just animals, raccoons or deer, but something about the rhythm of it didn't feel random. It wasn't the light stepping of an animal running through the brush. It was slower, heavier, spaced out. It stopped when I stood up, then started again when I sat down. I told myself I was overthinking it. When I finally crawled into the tent, I left the fire burning low, just enough to keep the light flickering. The tent felt small, and every sound outside seemed louder now. The creaking of trees, the soft rustle of the wind. I lay there for what felt like an hour before sleep finally caught me. I woke up suddenly. I didn't know what time it was, but it was still pitch black outside. My heart was pounding, and for a second, I didn't know why. Then I heard it again, a crunch. Not close, but not far either. Someone or something was walking near my camp. I held my breath and listened. The steps came slowly, moving in a half circle around the tent. My first thought was maybe it was a bear, but the steps weren't heavy enough for that. It sounded human. I didn't move. I could hear the sound of twigs breaking underfoot, the faint brushing of something against a bush. I reached for my flashlight quietly, switched it on, and pointed it toward the tent's thin fabric wall. The light cast faint shadows outside, and I thought I saw movement, a shape shifting slightly near the trees. My chest tightened. I didn't say anything, didn't even breathe. After about a minute, the sound faded. Nothing, just the creak again. I lay there, staring at the ceiling of the tent, wide awake. My mind ran through possibilities: a hunter, a lost hiker, maybe just an animal moving around. Still, it didn't feel right. I kept thinking how the steps circled the tent instead of moving straight through. After another half hour, I unzipped the tent and looked outside. My fire was out. The clearing was lit only by the moonlight filtering through the trees. Everything was still. My truck sat in the same spot. I stepped out slowly, the cold air biting through my shirt. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight. Nothing. I walked a small circle around the camp just to check. The ground near the tent had faint footprints in the dirt, boot prints. Human. I knew they weren't mine. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't want to panic, but I also didn't want to stay there. I grabbed my axe and kept it inside the tent with me when I crawled back in. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening, waiting for any sound. Nothing else happened. When morning came, I packed everything up quickly. I told myself I was leaving just because I was tired, not scared, but that was a lie. I threw my gear into the truck and started driving out. The forest looked different in the morning. Less threatening but somehow emptier, like nothing wanted to live there. About 2 miles down the road, I saw something that made my chest tighten again. On the right side of the dirt road, near a clump of bushes, there was an old fire pit, still smoking faintly. A torn tarp hung between 2 trees, and beside it, there was a plastic chair, tipped over. I slowed the truck. The campsite looked abandoned, but not for long. There were fresh footprints around it. I got out and looked closer. There were empty beer cans, a half-eaten bag of chips, and a small pile of cigarette butts. Someone had been there recently. What made my stomach twist, though, was what was hanging from one of the branches nearby. A dirty blue jacket, like someone had left it to dry. Under it, on a flat rock, there was a hunting knife. The blade looked clean, but I didn't touch it. The whole place gave me a bad feeling. I got back in the truck and drove faster, not looking back. The road wound through miles of forest before hitting the highway. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station near Glenwood Springs. Inside, I told the clerk I'd been camping near Black Hollow Creek. He frowned a bit and said that area had been closed for hunting 2 years ago. He said people still went out there, but it wasn't patrolled anymore. Some hikers had reported missing gear, tents torn down, food stolen. Nothing too serious, but strange enough that locals avoided it. He shrugged it off, but I didn't. When I got home, I kept thinking about those boot prints around my tent. They weren't random. Whoever it was had walked around quietly, watching. Maybe they thought I was asleep. Maybe they planned to steal something. Or maybe they were waiting for me to come out. I still camp sometimes, but never alone. I started locking my truck from the inside when I sleep, even when it's parked in my driveway. I don't scare easily, but something about that night stuck with me. It wasn't what I saw, but what I didn't. The idea that someone was out there, in the dark, walking slow circles around my camp while I tried to pretend I was asleep. It sits in my head every time I hear a twig snap at night. I don't know who they were, and I don't want to. But sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder if I had unzipped the tent just a few minutes earlier, maybe I would have seen their face. Or maybe they were closer than I realized, just waiting for me to move. That's why I never went back to Black Hollow Creek. I didn't need to. Some places feel like they're meant to be left alone. I went camping in northern Arizona in the fall of 2017. I was 27 back then, working long weeks at a car parts warehouse in Phoenix. I didn't have many close friends, and most weekends I stayed home. But that October I decided I needed a break from everything. I packed up my old blue Ford Ranger, grabbed my tent, a sleeping bag, a lantern, a few cans of chili, and drove north into the high desert. I ended up at a quiet area near the Little Colorado River, not far from a place called Cameron. I'd been there once before with my cousin years earlier. It wasn't an official campsite, just an open patch of land surrounded by thin pine trees and scrub. The river ran about 30 yards downhill from where I parked. The air was cold and dry, the sky clear. I set up camp near a half-burned fire ring, pitched my tent, and sat on an old log, eating cold beans straight from the can. By the time I finished setting up, The sun was already dropping behind the cliffs in the distance. I remember how fast the light faded there. 1 minute everything was golden, the next it was gray. I started a fire with a few dry sticks and the lighter I kept in the glove box. The flames caught quick, snapping quietly in the still air. That first night was fine. I sat by the fire, listening to the slow rush of the river below. A few coyotes called far off to the east. I felt relaxed, even peaceful. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 10 and fell asleep not long after. The next morning, I hiked along the river for a while. The ground was covered in small animal tracks, mostly rabbits and raccoons, but some larger ones too, maybe from a stray dog or coyote. I didn't think much about it. I had brought a small camera and took a few pictures of the cliffs and the water. Around noon, the wind picked up and thin dust blew through the valley. I spent most of the afternoon gathering wood for the night, enough to last until morning. When evening came again, I lit the fire and cooked one of the chili cans in a small metal pot. The temperature dropped fast after sunset. I put on a jacket and sat close to the flames. The wind died down completely. Everything got silent, so quiet it almost felt wrong. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. That's when I noticed movement near the trees. At first, I thought it was just the flicker of the fire making shadows dance. But the shape didn't move like a shadow. It stayed low to the ground, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, and shifted slightly from one tree to another. I froze, staring hard, trying to make out what it was. The fire crackled behind me. It looked like a person at first, thin, bent over, but it didn't move like one. It was slow, deliberate. I thought maybe it was an animal, a deer or coyote, until it stood upright. I only saw it for a second, maybe less, but it was enough. A tall, lean shape, pale in the firelight, standing completely still between the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. My stomach dropped. I told myself it was just someone hiking, maybe a local hunter or ranch hand. But something about the way it moved, it wasn't normal. I threw a few bigger logs on the fire and sat there, staring into the dark. After a while, I heard something again, a soft rustling sound coming from the left side of camp, then another from behind. It was quiet, like someone stepping on dry grass, trying not to make noise. I gripped the hatchet I kept near my chair and waited. The sound came again, closer this time. The firelight only reached so far. Beyond that, it was pitch black. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark. Then I caught a glimpse of it again, this time crawling on all fours at the edge of the light, moving fast, too fast. It darted behind a bush, then vanished. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up with the fire burning high until morning. Every few minutes I'd hear something faint. A branch snap, a scrape of movement, then silence. When the sun finally came up, I looked around the edge of camp. There were footprints in the dirt. Not boots, not animal tracks. Bare feet. The toes were long and splayed wide, like they'd been walking on rough ground for years. I packed my stuff fast, threw it in the truck, and drove about 10 miles down the dirt road before stopping. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that maybe it was some hermit or local messing around. I calmed down after a while and decided to camp one more night before heading home. That was my biggest mistake. I found another spot closer to the main road, a small clearing near a dry creek bed. Felt safer, more open. I could see the road from there. I set up camp again, made a small fire, and sat in the back of my truck as the sky turned dark. Around midnight, I heard footsteps again. Slow ones this time, steady. Not animal sounds, human, heavy, deliberate. My stomach clenched. I turned off my lantern and sat perfectly still. The footsteps stopped near the edge of camp. The fire was low now, just glowing embers. I could barely see anything, but there was something there, a figure standing just beyond the dim light. My eyes adjusted slowly. It looked human, tall, thin, wearing torn clothes, maybe just a ragged shirt, but its posture was off. The head tilted too far to one side, like it was broken or hanging loose. It didn't move for almost a full minute. Then it turned and walked away into the trees. Not fast, just steady and quiet. I sat there for hours, not moving. When the first bit of dawn light showed, I got in my truck and left everything behind. Tent, cooler, even my sleeping bag. I drove straight back to Phoenix. For days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I tried to convince myself it was just a person, maybe some stranger living out in the desert. But there were little things that didn't fit. The barefoot tracks, the strange crawling motion, the way it stood there watching. A week later, I looked it up online. Reports of strange sightings in that area. People had seen tall, thin figures near the river, or heard something mimicking voices in the night. They called it a skinwalker, something from Navajo stories. I didn't believe in any of that before, but after that trip, I didn't know what to think. A few months later, when I finally went back to get my camping gear, everything was gone. The tent poles were snapped and scattered, the cooler was ripped open, and the sleeping bag was shredded into pieces. The fire ring was crushed flat, like something heavy had stomped through it. There were more tracks, leading down toward the dry creek bed, bare feet again, dozens of them, all pointing one way. I followed them for a while until they disappeared into the sand. I left right after that and never went camping alone again. Even now, sometimes when I drive at night through quiet desert roads, I catch myself watching the tree lines, just in case. It's not fear of ghosts or monsters. It's fear of something real. Something that walks and watches but isn't quite right. And every now and then, when the wind dies completely and the world goes silent like it did that night by the river, I swear I can almost hear those same slow footsteps again, just behind me, waiting for me to stop. It was the fall of 2016 when I decided to take a solo camping trip deep into the woods of northern Washington. I was 28 at the time, looking to disconnect and clear my head. Life had been a blur. Work was stressful, my relationship was on the rocks, and I hadn't had a break in ages. So, I packed up my gear and set off for a weekend in the wilderness, hoping the isolation would help me find some peace. I arrived at the campsite just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine filled my lungs. I'd done my research, and the spot I'd chosen was far off any beaten path. Secluded enough that I'd have the place to myself, and that's exactly how I liked it. Setting up camp took longer than I expected. The ground was uneven, and the tent's poles seemed to have a mind of their own. After some cursing and adjusting, I finally got the tent up and my gear organized. The first night was peaceful. I cooked a simple dinner over the campfire, listened to the sounds of the forest around me, and went to bed early. I had no intention of doing anything too strenuous. I'd hike around the area the next day, just taking in the sights and getting a break from the constant noise of city life. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling well-rested and ready to explore. The air was cool, and a heavy mist clung to the ground, giving the forest an eerie feeling. I strapped on my boots and set off down a narrow trail that led deeper into the woods. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the isolation. I hadn't spent much time in the woods before, especially not alone, and the quiet was something I wasn't quite used to. The mist only seemed to get thicker as the day went on, and soon, I found myself in a section of the forest that didn't feel familiar. The trees were older here, their twisted branches creating a canopy that blocked out most of the light. It was like walking in a tunnel of green, the path barely visible beneath my feet. I paused for a moment, listening to the stillness, but then heard something. A rustle in the bushes to my left. I froze, instinctively gripping the handle of my knife. My first thought was that it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a rabbit, but the sound wasn't right. It was too deliberate, too heavy. It sounded like someone was moving through the underbrush, but with no intention of being stealthy. I called out, trying to convince myself it was just a bear or some other wildlife, but nothing responded. I stood there for a long minute, waiting, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence returned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I didn't want to overreact, so I pushed the thought from my mind and kept walking. But every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, as if expecting someone or something to be there. I spent the next few hours walking in circles, trying to convince myself it was just my nerves. But the feeling only grew stronger, and soon I noticed something strange. There were no animal tracks anywhere. Not a single sign of wildlife, not even bird calls. Just the sound of my boots crunching on the dry leaves beneath me and the distant whisper of wind through the trees. By late afternoon, I had wandered so far off the trail that I wasn't entirely sure how to get back to camp. The mist was thicker now, and the sun was low in the sky. I wasn't lost exactly, but I wasn't sure which way to go either. Then, as I was scanning the trees ahead of me, I saw something. A figure standing between the trunks. It was tall, almost unnaturally so, and its shape seemed wrong. The person, if it was a person, wasn't moving, just standing still, staring at me. I couldn't make out any features. It was just a dark silhouette against the trees. The air felt thicker, heavier. I tried to call out, but my voice got caught in my throat. I took a step back, then another, but the figure didn't move. It was as if it was waiting for me to make the next move. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran. The forest was a blur around me, branches scratching at my face, the uneven ground threatening to trip me. I didn't look back, couldn't. I just kept running, knowing deep down that if I stopped, if I let myself think too much, I wouldn't make it out of there. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled out of the trees and found myself at the edge of a small, overgrown clearing. I was completely disoriented, but I could see the faint outline of my tent in the distance. I had somehow made it back to camp. My legs were shaking, my heart racing, and I collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. I didn't know what to think. What had I just seen? Who or what was that figure in the woods? I hadn't heard anything or seen anyone else in the area all day. There was no way someone could have followed me without making a sound. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze. I couldn't shake the image of that tall figure in the woods. My campfire didn't provide much warmth, and the shadows seemed to creep closer with every flicker of the flames. I didn't sleep that night, not a wink. Every little sound outside my tent made me tense up, thinking someone was out there, waiting. The next morning, I packed up my gear quickly, eager to leave. I didn't even bother to eat, just grabbed my things, broke down the tent, and started hiking back to my car. The mist had lifted, but the eerie feeling still clung to the air. When I got to the parking area, I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me from the woods, but there was nothing. Just the usual abandoned campsite with a few scattered cars. I haven't been back to that area since. I've camped plenty of other places, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever I saw that day in the woods was real. It wasn't some trick of the light or an overactive imagination. It was too deliberate, too wrong. I'm still not sure what it was, but I know one thing for sure. I don't ever want to find out.